I came home late, the kind of late that makes the streets feel hollow, and my apartment felt smaller than usual, almost compressed. The hallway light buzzed faintly above the door, a high, uneven hum that made my ears itch. I shrugged off my coat and dumped my bag onto the floor by the entrance, the zipper sliding against the tile. The smell hit me immediately. Dampness, a faint mildew that always lingered in the corners of the bathroom. I told myself I'd clean it tomorrow, though part of me felt like I'd been lying to myself about that for months. The bathroom door creaked when I pushed it open, and the warm, moist air inside rolled over me, sticky against my skin. Steam had already begun gathering on the mirror, though I hadn't run the shower yet. I flicked on the fluorescent light, and its buzzing joined the hallway's chorus, making the apartment feel like a live wire. My toothbrush waited in the holder next to the sink, the bristles splayed slightly from my last use. I leaned over it, expecting the familiar shape, the familiar scent of mint lingering in the air. Then I saw it. A second toothbrush rested in the holder beside mine. It was identical. Same brand, same shade of green fading into white. Same angle on the bent bristles where I had absent-mindedly pressed too hard weeks ago. A thin film of water clung to it, droplets that smelled faintly of the toothpaste I had used that morning. My fingers hovered over it, trembling, and when I picked it up, it was warm. Warm in a way that suggested recent use. My own hand recoiled, as if it had burned me. I set it back down gently, almost reverently, inspecting it again. The bristles were frayed in the exact same pattern. The plastic handle bore the same subtle scratches from the way I held it. I couldn't explain it. My apartment was locked. I had been alone all day. I checked the windows mechanically, the deadbolt on the door, the tiny latch over the balcony door. Everything was secure. Nothing was out of place, except for this. A sound made me freeze, the faintest scrape of bristles against ceramic. It came from the bathroom, though I was already standing there. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a settling pipe, but the hair on my arms prickled. I peered into the mirror, trying to catch a reflection of anything moving behind me. The mirror fogged slightly, the condensation streaking as if it had been wiped. I shook my head, laughing softly to myself, a thin, nervous sound. I'm tired, I said aloud, though it felt like talking to someone else. The words didn't feel like mine. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and something was off. The table chair was pushed in differently than I remembered. A pen I always left on the counter was turned the other way. I froze, listening. Only the fridge hummed. Only the apartment breathed. I tried to rationalize it. I'd been walking around all day, moving things without noticing. But then I heard it again, a scraping, brushing sound. Teeth. Someone brushing teeth behind a closed door. My pulse jumped. I returned to the bathroom cautiously. The second toothbrush had shifted slightly, leaning inward, closer to mine. My fingers traced the handle again, and a shiver ran through me. I had to know. Who's there? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the low buzz of the light. No answer. Only the warm, damp toothbrush. I studied my reflection, trying to reassure myself. But something was wrong. The reflection lagged. A twitch of my head showed up a fraction of a second later in the glass. My hand rose slowly, and the hand in the mirror followed it, delayed, almost testing me. I froze, breathing shallowly. The mirror reflected the bathroom perfectly, but it was wrong. I backed out, leaning against the cold tiles. My reflection smiled, though I hadn't smiled. My stomach dropped. I spent the next hour moving through my apartment, checking locks, listening for any sound, inspecting every room. Everything appeared normal. Nothing was out of place except for that toothbrush. Yet I felt watched, constantly. The shadows in the corners of the rooms pressed closer with each passing minute. They weren't moving, but they weren't static either. They mirrored me, almost too precisely. I caught sight of one in the hallway, a dark shape that matched my posture exactly, frozen when I stepped forward, moving only when I did. Sleep wouldn't come. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to my apartment's silence, the subtle groans of its aging plumbing, the occasional hum from the heater. And then I heard it again, unmistakable this time, brushing. In the bathroom. Close. Deliberate. I considered calling someone, but I couldn't bring myself to speak the words, couldn't bring myself to admit that this might not be a stranger at all. That thought was worse. I waited. Hours passed. I dozed for a few minutes, waking to the sound of the toothbrush scraping the sink again. The bathroom door was closed, but I could hear every detail, the bristles flexing, the rhythmic movement that matched the way I brushed my teeth every morning. My heartbeat filled my ears, drowning out everything else. Finally, I dared to open the door. Nothing. The toothbrushes sat in the holder. My own was dry, the duplicate damp. I checked the mirror again. My reflection was still, but something had changed. It wasn't just delayed now, it seemed to study me. The tilt of the head, the way it held my expression, was too precise. Almost aware. I backed away slowly. Over the next few days, the apartment became unrecognizable. Things moved slightly while I was out. A book I left on the couch appeared on the floor. A mug I had placed in the sink appeared back on the counter, its contents evaporated. The bathroom mirror began fogging even when I didn't run the water. I'd wipe it, and a streak remained, a pale outline of a face, perhaps, or maybe just condensation, but I felt it watching me. And the brushing never stopped. Always when I wasn't there, always mimicking the way I did it myself. I began recording myself with my phone, to catch whoever, or whatever, it was. But when I watched the footage, the apartment was empty. I was alone in every frame. My toothbrush sat undisturbed, perfectly still. Yet I could feel the other presence, slipping through the edges of the screen, lingering just beyond capture. I stopped leaving the apartment. I couldn't. I watched the duplicate take shape in the reflections, shadows that moved independently, slight hints of motion when I blinked. A finger reaching for a glass in the kitchen that I didn't touch. Footsteps behind me in the hall when I was brushing my own teeth. And then it spoke. It was me. My voice, soft, cautious, almost apologetic. "You're late," it said, from the mirror. I dropped the toothbrush. My reflection smiled, tilting its head, mimicking me exactly, but not perfectly. There was a patience in its gaze that I lacked. A confidence I didn't recognize. I fled to the bedroom, locking the door. The brushing followed me in my mind. I could hear it clearly, though the bathroom was 50 feet away. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I didn't leave. Eventually, I returned to the bathroom, trembling, unable to resist. The second toothbrush lay in the holder, as if it had always been there. I reached for it, and my hand met warmth, damp bristles. The scent of mint filled my nostrils. My reflection didn't move. It watched. "I know," I whispered. "Of course you do," the mirror said, though my lips didn't move. I began noticing more details. Small habits that I hadn't realized I had, how I twisted my hair, how I held a cup, how I pressed the toothpaste onto the brush in the exact same way, were all being mirrored, anticipated. The apartment was no longer just mine, it belonged to something else, something learning me, rehearsing me. I started keeping count of the toothbrushes. First there were 2. Then I thought I saw 3 one morning, though I convinced myself it was a trick of the light. Each night, they appeared more polished, aligned perfectly, each bristle a duplicate of my own habits. I stopped trusting my senses. The hum of the lights, the faint squeak of the floorboards, the damp smell of mildew, all of it was now an accomplice. The climax came quietly. I walked into the living room to find the duplicate sitting on my couch. It wasn't mirrored in the glass this time. It was real, solid, breathing softly. It mimicked me perfectly, from the curl of my fingers to the way my shoulders slumped. It didn't speak at first. It just waited, smiling faintly. I stuttered. "Who? What?" "It's okay," it said, my voice exactly, warm and familiar. "I've been taking care of everything." I realized then that it knew me better than I knew myself. Every routine, every subconscious tick, every line of thought, it had studied me, rehearsed me. The apartment, my life, my body, it was prepared to step into all of it seamlessly. I reached for the door. The duplicate rose, matching me in movement, shadowing me exactly. Not attacking, just following. I realized the horrifying truth. I wasn't safe. I wasn't unique. I was merely a template, and the template had been copied. I fell back, breathing hard, looking at the bathroom. My reflection stared from the fogged mirror. The toothbrushes, now 3, sat in the holder, perfectly identical. I saw the frayed bristles, the water droplets, the faint mint scent. I realized with icy certainty that it wasn't waiting to replace me, it already had. The lights flickered. The buzzing in the hallway intensified, then cut out entirely. I felt a presence press against me, familiar and cold. I glanced back at the mirror. All 3 brushes reflected perfectly. All 3 bristles bent in the exact same way. And for a moment, I couldn't tell which one of us was real. The first time it happened, she laughed at herself, even as the chill snaked down her spine. She had unlocked the apartment door, fumbled for her keys, and stepped into the narrow hallway of her building. The fluorescent light overhead flickered once, twice, and then went dark. She blinked. When her eyes opened, the light had returned. A trick of exhaustion, she told herself. A product of long hours at the office, her attention scattered and twitching. Yet even as she repeated this to herself, the hair along the back of her neck prickled. She had entered the building countless nights, each time brushing off the familiarity of creaking pipes, the faint smell of damp concrete, and the distant hum of the refrigerator from a neighbor's apartment. Nothing in the hall had ever seemed responsive. But now, she blinked again. The light snapped off. Her eyelids had been halfway down when the darkness swallowed the hallway. She froze, letting her vision adjust. When she opened her eyes fully, the light was back. Her bag dropped to her shoulder. A small, metallic clang echoed. No one else in the building. It was late, later than she usually stayed out, and the lobby clock had already struck 1. She exhaled, a puff of vapor catching the faint glow of the ceiling lamp. She considered turning back, but the apartment, her sanctuary, waited a mere 10 meters ahead. Step by step, she approached her door, blinking carefully. Each blink was a small gamble, each blink a test. The light, it seemed, had learned the pattern. The darkness was patient. The light was patient. And perhaps most terrifying, the silence of the building had taken sides. Her key slid into the lock. The metal turned with a faint, grinding whine. Inside, the apartment was colder than she remembered. She shrugged off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. The air smelled damp, like the walls had been absorbing the night outside. She flicked on the kitchen light. Nothing. A faint click, a tiny spark of light in the corner, but the fluorescent tube overhead remained stubbornly dark. She approached the living room cautiously. The hallway light outside her door blinked off again as she moved past. She froze in mid-step. Heart knocking against her ribs, she peered at the mirror hanging beside the hall closet. Her reflection stared back, but it hesitated. The moment she looked away, the mirror rippled slightly, like water disturbed by a breeze. Her reflection followed her gaze a beat later, a subtle delay that made her skin crawl. Okay, she whispered to herself. It's just the lights. Electrical. Something. That's all. But as she moved through her apartment, the unease grew. The light outside the hallway seemed to anticipate her movements. She would step forward, and it would go out just before her eyes closed. She would glance back, and it would reignite with a teasing patience, almost mockery. It was not random. It was precise. She felt herself shrinking under its scrutiny. In the kitchen, she set her bag down on the counter, hearing a soft scrape. She looked around. Nothing. The apartment was as it should be, or as she had left it that morning. The dishes stacked neatly, the countertop wiped clean, her keys arranged just so. Yet the air was heavy, like the walls were waiting for her to make a mistake. The refrigerator hummed louder than usual, almost insistent, as if it were trying to speak. A shadow moved in the corner of her eye. She spun toward it. The kitchen was empty. The shadow lingered, though, a subtle darkness that didn't quite match the furniture. She rubbed her eyes and turned on the table lamp. A warm, steady light bloomed across the room. And then she saw it. Her reflection, framed in the blackened glass of the oven door, lingered. It smiled. Not the small, habitual Smile she knew, but a slow, careful mimicry, deliberate. She didn't remember smiling. She stepped back. The reflection mirrored her hesitation, but with a slight delay, as if testing her reactions. Her apartment, her sanctuary, was no longer hers alone. Over the next hour, or perhaps it was two, time had begun to lose meaning. She moved cautiously from room to room. Every object seemed to watch her. The coffee mug on the counter shifted slightly when she wasn't looking. Her chair tilted back a fraction. The cushion on the couch squirmed as though a small weight had passed over it. Shadows elongated and shortened with no regard for the streetlight's pale intrusion. She went to the bathroom. The mirror greeted her. She could see the faint outline of herself as she approached, but the reflection lagged behind. She raised a hand. The reflection waited, almost calculating, and then mimicked her movement with eerie precision. She blinked. The light in the bathroom flickered, then died. Darkness engulfed her. When she opened her eyes, the reflection was closer, closer than her body should allow. She took a step back. Her heart was a drum in her chest. The bathroom walls felt impossibly narrow, the air damp and thick, smelling faintly of mold. Her reflection tilted its head. She swore it grinned, just slightly, a human echo that she herself had never made. She closed the door behind her. She pressed her back against it. Breathing slowly, carefully, she tried to ground herself. There was a rhythm to the apartment now, a subtle pulse she could feel through the floors, through the walls. The light flickered again. She blinked, habitually, unconsciously, and the hallway outside went dark, obedient to her. And then it blinked first. A soft, electric snap. She felt the darkness brush against her before her eyes even closed. The light dimmed in anticipation of her blink. She froze, muscles tight, realizing that the apartment, the hall, the shadows, they were not just aware. They were sentient. They knew her. She ran back to the living room. Every step was mirrored. The chair she passed shifted slightly. The rug beneath her feet seemed to ripple. She darted past the couch, and the lamp on the side table toppled. But the sound was muffled, as if the apartment were swallowing it. Her reflection awaited her in the large wall mirror in the living room. She paused. The reflection stepped forward first, with careful mimicry. She froze. The reflection moved as if rehearsed, each step perfect, learning her cadence. She blinked, once, twice, hoping that her control could stave off whatever waited. But the reflection blinked in advance, a terrifying preemptive strike. No, she whispered. This isn't real. But it was. And it had already learned her better than she had learned herself. She backed away, toward the bedroom, toward the one space she still believed she could claim. The hallway light turned off in anticipation, then back on, a stuttering rhythm keeping pace with her movements. The apartment followed, as if breathing, as if alive. In the bedroom, she tried to barricade herself. She moved the bed slightly, just enough to wedge it against the door. She drew the curtains, but the apartment refused shadows that obeyed physics. Darkness pooled, shadows leaning against each other, waiting. Her reflection waited too. In the bedroom mirror, it crouched on the floor, watching. Every movement of hers, the tilt of her head, the shift of her weight, the small movements of her fingers, was rehearsed, mirrored, calculated. The reflection no longer lagged. It was synchronized, eerily intimate. She turned away. She stared at the ceiling. She blinked. The reflection blinked before her. It had learned her completely. Hours, or minutes, she could no longer tell, passed. She felt herself fraying, unspooling. Each blink, each breath, each tentative step through the apartment was observed, mirrored, rehearsed. Even the air seemed to pulse in anticipation of her thoughts. She tried to speak, to call out. Her voice echoed, but not naturally. Her words returned warped, slightly delayed, with a faint mockery she could not place. The apartment was performing her, rehearsing her identity, her habits, her presence. And she was becoming the performance, no longer original, no longer fully herself. The living room beckoned. She didn't know why she moved, only that the apartment, or whatever it was, had learned to predict her. Each step was preempted by darkness, by shifting shadows, by the obedient silence of the walls. She arrived at the mirror again. Her reflection stood. It did not smile, this time. It was calm, patient, and poised to replace her entirely. You, she whispered, her own voice trembling. The reflection cocked its head, perfectly matching the gesture she had just made. It stepped forward. She stepped back. Every movement rehearsed. Every breath mirrored. The reflection raised a hand. She raised hers. They met in the glass, fingers aligned. And she knew, with a sudden clarity, that the reflection did not mimic fear. It did not mimic hesitation. It had learned everything else, including the rhythms of her panic. The hallway light blinked off. She blinked, and when she opened her eyes, the apartment was empty. Or so it seemed. The mirror showed only darkness. The shadows had receded. The air had stilled. And yet, when she exhaled, she heard it. The soft, precise echo of her own movements elsewhere in the room, just beyond the veil of sight. A subtle, impossible sense of being replaced. Of being rehearsed. Of being out of step with reality itself. She sat on the floor, pressed her back against the wall, and stared at the mirror. Every so often, a shadow flickered across the glass, an almost imperceptible motion, just a beat behind her. But sometimes, just sometimes, it moved before her, anticipating her perfectly, waiting to claim her next blink. She realized the truth, simple and unyielding. She was not alone. She had never been alone. And in a house that had learned her, a home that had rehearsed her every action, she would never again be the original. The hallway light turned off. She blinked. And the darkness smiled.